Hi, this is Jeffrey Wernick. It's kind of peculiar to be introducing the fine print without Bruce. Bruce had a deposition, a legal thing. He expected that he would be around on time, but it was definitely out of his control. So hopefully Bruce can make it shortly. Meanwhile, we're here with Ryan and with Dennis. We're happy Dennis could make it this week. Hopefully, we'll find a week where Dennis, Bruce, and Ryan and I all coincide. But it looks like that's not going to be the case today. I'd like to start off with if Ryan, you can put that clip on, please.
Well, you have to hit play, but it's the one to the right.
Oh, I have to play. Okay, let me go back. Sorry for my.
I'm Senator Alyssa Slotkin.
Senator Mark Kelly.
Representative Chris DeLuzio.
Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander.
Representative Chrissy Houlihan.
Congressman Jason Crow.
I was a captain in the United States Navy.
Former CIA officer.
Former Navy.
Former paratrooper and Army Ranger.
Former intelligence officer.
Former Air Force.
We want to speak directly to members of the military
and the intelligence community
who take risks each day
to keep Americans safe.
We know you are under enormous stress and pressure right now.
Americans trust their military.
But that trust is at risk.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
and intelligence community professionals
against American citizens.
Like us. You all swore an oath
to protect and defend this Constitution.
And right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad,
but from right here at home.
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
No one has to carry out orders that violate the law
or our Constitution.
We know this is hard
and that it's a difficult time to be a public servant.
But whether you're serving in the CIA,
the Army,
or Navy,
the Air Force,
your vigilance is critical.
And know that we have your back.
Because now, more than ever,
the American people need you.
We need you to stand up for our laws,
our Constitution,
and who we are as Americans. Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up the ship.
Okay, now I'm going to add to the stage what was Trump's response to that video. Seditious behavior, punishable by death. Okay, hang them. George Washington would. I'm going to address both these issues and then turn it over to Dennis for comment. But I want to, as we're talking about it, I want to keep this up because I want to remind people of this. Was the response. Trump and his administration have been claiming that they should already be in jail, that this is seditious behavior, and the message they keep putting out is that these people said that they gave instructions to the military to disobey Trump's orders, okay? That is bullshit. It is a lie. They were very clear about, first they said the risk of using the military against American citizens, okay? So they made no reference to really the use of the military against foreign enemies. They made it specific to the military being used for against American citizens, and that the act had to be clearly an illegal act. Okay, because the president says it. That we get back to basically justifying, from Trump's point of view, of the Nuremberg defense of doesn't matter whether it was legal or not. I got instructions, so I basically had to follow these instructions because of who instructed. The instruction book is the Constitution. It's not the president. The president gets up, takes his hand, puts a foot up on the Bible, says, "What am I going to do? I'm going to defend the Constitution." That's his obligation. That's his responsibility. Okay. No one takes an oath of office to the president. Okay. They take an oath of office to the Constitution, the law of the land. The president is not the law of the land. The Constitution is the law of the land. This should not be confusing. It should be simple. You're not seditious by being obedient to the Constitution. Okay? You are being seditious if you have a president that is attempting to usurp the Constitution, replace the Constitution, and you blindly follow the president to usurp the Constitution. If the president says, I want the military to go in and shut down the court and Congress, pull them all out and shoot them, do you think Trump is saying if the military doesn't do that, that they're seditious? That's what he's saying. If Trump gets up and says tomorrow, I want to kill every Democrat, okay, go and do it, okay, then he says that the seditious behavior is not him trying to assassinate every enemy. It's the military. It's the people who are saying to the military, you don't have an obligation to follow an order if that order is an illegal order. Because again, Trump says, if I say it, it's not illegal. I'm above the Constitution, okay? He doesn't take an oath to say, I'm only obedient to myself, okay? That I am the law, okay? So this is not seditious behavior, okay? And therefore, it's not punishable by death. They've kind of walked away the issue of punishable by death. Well, people's administration have. Trump has not walked away from that, okay? And Trump has said these people should already be put in jail. So not only seditious behavior, it's seditious behavior that's not even subject to due process, okay? So these people are reminding the military of what their duty is, of what their obligation is, that their oath is to protect, defend the Constitution. By protecting and defending the Constitution, you're protecting and defending the country, okay? The fidelity is to one thing. That's what everybody swears fidelity to, is to the Constitution, okay? That should be really clear, and I really don't understand how anyone cannot understand how clear that is. Now let's go back to George Washington, saying George Washington would hang them, okay? We have an example from George Washington, okay? Here again, and Dennis can probably add more to this than I can, and I'm sure Bruce could even add much more than I can, but unfortunately Bruce is not here right now. But I'm going to give a very brief history lesson, and maybe Dennis will want to add to what I have to say. Okay, George Washington had an example. There was an actual rebellion. Okay, it was called the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay, Alexander Hamilton implemented this excise tax because he wanted to pay off the war debt. It was a very unpopular tax, and people protested and refused to pay the tax. So Alexander Hamilton convinced, and others convinced Washington he had to go and get on his horse, bring the soldiers, and get people to pay the excise tax. So he had to defeat this rebellion against the country of people who were not willing to pay an excise tax that the federal government thought was necessary for it to pay off its debts associated with the Revolutionary War. So what happened? Okay, Washington went, stayed a little bit, he left. Eventually the rebellion ended. After the rebellion ended, there only ended up 2 people being convicted. Okay, the 2 people were convicted of treason. And what did George Washington do with the 2 people they were convicted with the death penalty? And what did George Washington do? The first pardons in the history of this country were George Washington pardoning the 2 people that were convicted, sentenced to death, and led the Whiskey Rebellion, okay, against a tax that was perceived as a very important tax to pay off its war debt. So clearly, George Washington would not hang them, okay? George Washington pardoned them. He didn't hang them. He pardoned them, okay? So, but if Trump knew anything about history, he would know that that's something George Washington would not do. And when he had the opportunity of people who led an actual rebellion, okay, he pardoned them. Dennis, I'd like to turn this over to you for your comments on this topic.
Sure, Jeffrey. Could you remove that?
Yeah, I'm removing it now. There we go.
Well, to begin with, it's obvious that the president has his own interpretation of the U.S. Constitution, which is at a variance from generally from what would be interpreted by the Supreme Court and what is commonly understood by many Americans. It's also true that the president has a rather idiosyncratic view of history. Now, not to mention how he views the legislative branch of government. Now, as someone who's participated in that legislative branch, the U.S. Constitution, Clause 1, Section 6, that would be Article 1, Section 6, Clause 1, is the speech and debate clause. Members of Congress have the ability and in many cases the duty to be able to speak out on issues that relate to their conduct of office, to the legislative work that they do. Of course, one of the exceptions is treason. And the president, in putting the treason card here, is ignoring a number of things. Number one, the members of the Senate and the House have the ability to be able to make legislation that the president may or not agree with. They have the ability to speak to issues that the president may or may not agree with. This is actually a free speech issue. Now, where treason comes in is when someone in the government does something that's against the Constitution openly and defiance of the Constitution, such as if a president of the United States, for example, would order troops to war without the consent of Congress, that's against the Constitution. If a president would ignore what we know as a law from the 19th century, the Posse Comitatus Act, which says you can't use troops for local law enforcement, that's against the Constitution. If you send a newly formed posse called ICE into American cities to arrest people, specifically ignoring their whole array of constitutional principles, notably around the 4th and 5th and 14th Amendment, that's open violation of the Constitution by the executive branch. So I think it would serve President Trump well to become better acquainted with the U.S. Constitution, with the powers of the executive branch, if and they should assert them, and with the limitations on the exercise of executive power when it comes to the use of U.S. armed forces. Any objection that members of Congress have, could be predictable, may or may not be ignored, but to try to play the treason card, if you want to call it that, it's hard to take it seriously, except it is being said by the President of the United States.
And repeated by other people in his administration.
Right.
And they're attempting to confuse people because the people they're misrepresenting what the people say, and they're intentionally misrepresenting what the people said. So everyone who's making these arguments that people said, and then Ryan, I'll turn this over to you, that when they saying is they continue to omit the word. They have, most people said they should. Some people said they must. One person said they must, disobey, refuse to do an illegal order. Okay. Trump and his minions, they're all just representing this as these people just telling people to just blatantly disobey the president, period. Okay. Which is not the statement. Their words are qualified. And to eliminate the word that's the important qualifier, that word illegal is it's basically a straw man. They're arguing against something that these people didn't say, yet they're labeling these people as seditious for misrepresenting their words and then saying that they all should be, put to death for the words that he claims they said that they never said.
I think that Jeffrey, I think we have to credit the president with taking hyperbole to greater heights. The use of the word traitor, the incitement of death, those are very powerful words. But when we step away from the hurly-burly of Washington and look at this in the cold light of forensics and the Constitution, what the president said does not merit the further attention, unless, of course, they take it to the next level, which is to file some kind of formal charges. And what we do see with this administration is a willingness to file charges against members of Congress of a criminal nature that I think have to be put in the arc of retribution for past charges against the president. The charges against Congresswoman, I think it's McIver from New Jersey, for allegedly shoving a government agent at a protest outside of a facility in New Jersey. Going after certain members of Congress for mortgage fraud. I mean, this is clearly about political payback. Yes. And this is a disservice to America, because the use of the U.S. Justice Department for political purposes, while it's a great fear that everyone has, that politicization of justice, and it's a suspicion that people have about government generally. We need to. It would be much better if this administration stopped this conduct, stopped accusing people of being traitors because they disagree with their policies, and found a way to be able to come to an agreement that would represent the basic needs of the American people for housing, decent wages, health care, and those things that people really care about, because there's a sense in which, we're looking at a Punch and Judy show here that doesn't connect with the practical aspirations of people.
Well, I'm going to jump in real quick and add some stuff to that before we get away from the original point, which is, first, to what Jeffrey said, it's important to include not just that they're excluding a word. More than once, and Vance, as of either yesterday or today, is literally stating that they were told to disobey legal orders. So that's a big difference, right? It's like, instead of just, because they can omit that part, which is what they're doing in the beginning, and claiming that they had the intention of, they knew what they were doing, is a comment you've heard a lot on those shows, which is all completely subjective. But when they are now saying that they were told to disobey legal orders, that's a direct lie. And that's what people are then parroting, and that's what you're hearing online. But great points by both of you. I agree entirely. This is a ridiculous situation. I do believe that there's political games being played, attacks on each other, but I think it's much bigger than that. And I think, as usual, at least from my perspective, standing back in a nonpartisan perspective, it seems that this is always used to just control American speech. But what's important, as we're highlighting here, is that this is obviously legal, right? As we highlighted, it's many times been outlined that you can't obviously disregard or ignore unjust or illegal orders, even though it's very difficult with the structure today. But them coming out and saying it, I argue most likely there is some level of them using this in order to cause something, or to maybe their intent was to get them to disregard ones that weren't legal. But it's all irrelevant, because what they stated was very clear, and that is legal. And what they're doing in response to it is pretending it was something else. So so everything we said is, I agree with what you guys are saying, but I want people to think about what else this might be about, whether it even just might be distraction from a bunch of other much larger stories. But I do think there's an element of that. I think it's important considering.
Well, if I may, Ryan, these things do become distractions, no question about it. But one of the things that's important to remember, and it was a fellow by the name of Murray Edelman, who many years ago wrote a monograph called Politics as Symbolic Action. And he talked about the role of government officials in sending out cues and in helping to form perceptions in a society. I mean, when a president, a vice president, and speak in particular, president speaks for the nation ostensibly, that impacts how people look at things. There's no question about it. And when the president of the United States calls someone a traitor, says that they should be put to death, hanged, whatever, implies that. On one hand, it must be taken seriously. And on the other, we have to understand that this administration has a continual stream of comments and conducts that are so extreme that one has to pull back the attention to things that matter to people. Economy. I mean, really, and do they end up being distractions? Absolutely. I mean, it's like one continuous game show. But hey, this isn't Apprentice anymore. This is the government of the United States of America. And the president apparently doesn't have any advisors who are telling him to cool it. And so unrestrained, he continues to move around and exert power, not like the master of The Apprentice, but more like a sorcerer's apprentice in the Disney movie, who loses control of the tidal forces around him and is eventually engulfed by them.
To your point about the advisors, though, Stephen Miller is one of them, and he's out there screening insurrection, right? So he does have advisors. They're just the ones fanning the flames, which I think is another point we should get into, which we often do. But insurrection is another point to consider. That's kind of another angle. What I'm saying is, I think it's pretty clear, and you could take this even as just a partisan point, and that it's part of it, of just the right trying to frame the left, but I definitely always think it's more than that. But the left terrorist Antifa narrative they've been building, these are pieces that they could use to construct what would ultimately end up being, like the invasion, Biden and Venezuela. Like, it all comes around to the idea that there's some kind of a justifiable reason to do what they're doing with ICE and immigration, and insurrection was one they point to often. So it's not lost to me that they keep pointing to that.
I would think that this administration would not want to play the insurrection card.
You don't think so?
I don't think they want to play that. See, my dogs were even barking at that one.
Well, flesh that out for me, because that's interesting. Because I'm here. I think there's probably a reason that they would do it to execute an agenda. But explain what I'm interested. Do you think there's a reason that might hurt them?
Well, here's excuse me. Here's what I mean by that. I mean, the president was accused of fulminating an insurrection. Mm-hmm. And there's still people, who take that as an article of political faith at this point, that he was involved in doing that. And if you look at that semantic theory of not invoking an elephant, I don't think that serves this administration by talking about someone else doing an insurrection. I think it basically reminds people of earlier charges that were made.
I see. That's a good point. Yeah, I get that. So but I think go ahead.
There's look, everyone likes to think that things that come out of Washington, there's always something in the background. There's always some rhyme or reason. There's some grand strategy here. It may be more like, a bunch of people in a sandlot playing football and drawing plays in the dirt. That's what it seems like to me. I don't see any grand strategy here. I see people who are basically, amateurs at governing, and I think you can govern from your spleen instead of your head and your heart.
I agree, and that's what's so interesting about today. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Their goal is not governing. Their goal is mobilizing their base, and they're professionals at mobilizing their base.
Well
professionalize at mobilizing enragement. Okay?
Yes.
That's their professional at, and I think that's their objective. Okay. So they look for issues. Maybe part of the reasons they look for these types of issues to mobilize their base is things aren't going so well. So if they don't have a lot to brag about, then they got to look to destroy what, because they got nothing to brag about.
But I will tell you something, in response to what you just said, Jeffrey, and you're right, that's what's going on. But let me tell you how this plays out based on what I see in mass movements. You can use anger to arouse a base and to mobilize it, but you can't sustain anger. There's a point at which you have to deliver something to people. It has to be tangible.
That's happening right now, I think, for the MAGA movement.
Right. And so you look at what's happening with ranchers, farmers who feel betrayed by trade laws and various administrative rules. You look at people who support the Make America Healthy again and are finding out the corrupt deals that are being made between the administration and chemical companies, for example. There's a you can get people going with anger, but you cannot sustain it. You have to deliver. And I'm telling you, on the economic issues, this is where this administration is going to get clobbered if they don't create a turnaround.
The way I agree with you that sustaining anger in the face of policy failures that are impacting people, where they become more angry about your policy failures than the other things you're trying to do and enrage them about other things while you're not dealing with the things that are important to them. Yes. So, but in looking at Trump's perspective, from Trump's perspective, provoking anger, inciting enragement has worked. Okay. So from his perspective, this is the most effective strategy. And until it doesn't work, he'll keep doing it until it proves to not work, you know?
Which very quickly, I think, is happening now with Mamdani overlap. Like, do you guys think, look how odd that was, how disjointed, and I think that's what that was, Jeffrey. It's an excellent point. Like, I think right now they're very much reevaluating that, because we can all see that they're losing momentum at the very least. I think it's much more than that. So this weird move with Mamdani, I think, was just a different path. What do you think about that? I think that's what's happening. I think it's response to what you said.
Well, but here's another. It's a good point you just made, Ryan, because it did cause people in the MAGA movement to say, "What's going on here?" But and so those are the ones whose juices are flowing when they hear, some juices are flowing when they hear words traitor and death and hanging thrown out there. But if you take basic dynamic psychology, when an organism keeps getting stimulated and is overstressed, it breaks down. And that's what I see beginning to happen, that the movement that the president started is beginning to break down. And I think that the contretemps with Marjorie Taylor Greene is an example.
But again, I keep it. You're looking at the psychology of the masses. I'm looking at the psychology of Trump. Okay. So the psychology of Trump is he's had a certain strategy and practice that he's worked his whole life that he feels has worked for him. So the question is, how much will he have to see that it's not working for him to make a decision that what he's lived his whole life doing is no longer working for him? So you can be as a neutral observer out there and saying, I study mass psychology and this is how the masses act, and that's your perception. And I agree with the statements that you make. The issue is, does he agree at this point? Is he aware of that literature? Is that his life experiences? And who is going to sit down with him and telling him, this isn't working? Who's going to give him that alternative perspective? What we see is a bunch of people who are reinforcing everything he does. So, who's providing that pushback? Who's the person he respects that will sit down and tell him? Because human nature also is that most people don't respond to something until it personally impacts them, until it's a crisis. Okay, if you say to somebody something, they don't pay attention to it. If you tap them on something, they don't pay attention to it. If you give a harder tap, they don't pay attention on them. If you smack them in the face and it really hurts, then they might pay attention. So at this point in time, Trump, I think, has, in a figurative sense, has not yet been smacked in the face, really punched hard in the face. He hasn't had Mike Tyson punch him in the face. Okay?
Well, I just want to, knowing how things are taken out of context, I just wanted said that I'm not, and I don't think anybody else on this podcast is arguing that the president of the United States be punched in the face.
Right. Figuratively. That's why I said figuratively, not literally.
I just wanted to say to our friends in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Justice Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency.
That's why I said figuratively, but it's good.
It's what's called, Mr. Chairman, a point of clarification. Now, yes. I want to just say, though, that the President of the United States may well, as often happens with any of us, see the world in his own image. But when, as many people do, but when that image begins to be at great variance with the experience that many Americans live, that's where he gets into trouble. And I frankly, as someone who's been doing this a while, I don't think that he's taken a position that's sustainable. The question to me is, what do the Democrats stand for? Because I haven't seen that yet. But we're focusing on the president. We've had this discussion began with members of Congress stating what is a truism. It's a truism to say that people who are serving do not have to follow an illegal order. But looking at this bigger picture, I don't think that if when you start to read the tea leaves about what's going on in this economy, and you talk to people who are having difficulty putting food on the table, paying their electric bills, paying their mortgages or their rent, I'm telling you that something else is happening, and the president can envision one America in his head, but he also better, go outside and go around the country, not just to adoring groups, but find out what's actually happening. And that may change, just like he changed his tune a little bit with Mondami. That may change.
I don't think he changed his tune. I mean, I think maybe both of you look more into that. I mean, I think Mamdani did a very good job of basically making it difficult for Trump to say no to him. What did his press secretary come out and say? You see, look at Trump. He's even willing to speak with communists. Actually, Mamdani is not a communist. There's a difference between socialism and communism. But again, they use inflammatory language intentionally that they know is inflammatory because their goal is to misinform people, not to actually inform people, but to misinform people. Because again, they want to mobilize their base. So
but Jeffrey, you keep doing it over and over, and people just go, nah, I'm done with that. I mean, you cannot keep people in that kind of a state just forever.
I agree with that in a general point, but to the focal point of the Mamdani thing, though, I look first to just at an objective sense, whether he meant to change.
How much of Trump's base is really
come on now?
How much of Trump's base is really abandoning him?
Okay, well, let me make a point. We can come back to that. So my point was about Mamdani, and what he did was different, right? Whether it was a trick or not, it was objectively. He was saying and doing things differently. So he often manipulates and lies and, says what people want to hear. But my thing is, I'm never going to speak to what he thinks and feels. I don't think anybody can, right? That's an opinion. So what I think is interesting is that he has, for however this administration, but longer, but let's just focus on Mamdani. He's been calling him terrible things. He called him a Jew hater on True Social and said he shouldn't be allowed here. He called him a jihadist. He called him, all these different terms. And then to sit down with him and go, oh, he's good, no big deal. That's not, from a general perspective, I do think it's important that people work together. So it's not, I'm speaking from the base and how they are going, wait a minute, you just been telling us this guy's going to destroy the country and then just brushed it off like he's part of the team. He even said he's going to make New York great again. So that means he's part of MAGA, so it's completely disjointing for people who were built on the idea that this guy was the biggest enemy, and one more point is the fact that Stephen Miller has been screaming about how the word fascism, it was why Charlie Kirk got killed, right? In this meeting, the guy's asked, do you think Trump's a fascist? And he starts to answer, and Trump goes, oh, just tell them yes, it's okay. And they laugh about it. So clearly it's not as big a deal as they were making. Those things are jarring for the base. That's important to think about.
Point well taken. And because if you're going to bring about change with, let's say, an opposing political force in another country that is perceived not to be friendly, you really have to set the stage to do that. You can't you can't create this whiplash moment, because it's very interesting. People who are skilled politically might have the ability to do that kind of a pirouette that we saw in the Oval Office last week with Mondani. And the public doesn't move as quickly. The president has shown in recent weeks with his meeting with the new head of Syria, who just a short time ago had a $10 million price on his head for his participation in Al-Qaeda. The president's meeting with MBS, who still is considered to be the person who directly ordered the murder of a journalist. The president has this capacity to be able to move, quickly in one direction one day, another direction in another day. That may or may not be the mark of a great leader. On the other hand, the political base that you just spoke to, Ryan, may have trouble following that, and it could be a source of testing the cohesiveness of that base.
Well, and so the statistics still show that the amount of Republican support for Trump is higher than Republican support for almost any other previous president. So he still has an overwhelming level of support, and more so than other past Republican presidents, Republican leaders. So I don't see. I mean, I see anecdotes about a fracturing in the base, and these anecdotes might lead to a further fracturing in the base. And if there's a further fracturing in the base, then Republicans might be, those that don't want to go along with Trump, but go along because they think it's the best strategy to choose, because they think the cost of choosing an alternative strategy is too high, then they might change the cost benefit analysis of doing everything Trump wants done. If that's the case, he will then lose the power that he exerts, and the power will become more distributed back to, Republicans in the Congress, who will have more input into, legislation, rather than just blindly, following what Trump instructs them to do. And yes, I agree with you, Bruce. It'll be a function of how long he can stay popular and how long his base of people will continue to support him. But even people, I've seen these focus groups when I see individuals where they say, you're hurt by this policy, you're hurt on tariffs, you're hurt on that, would you still vote for him? And they still say yes. Okay, they're still writing him checks. So they're still writing him checks more generously than they are to other people. So
I don't know how we can. There's a lot of polls, and I don't disagree with you. I think it's pretty clear that he's still got a ton of support. But I'm not going to say whether I know for a fact whether it's majority or not. But I think it's very clear with Candace Owens being one of, if not the most popular podcast in the world. That was recently pointed out. she came out publicly saying she regrets voting for him. She wouldn't recommend again. That's a huge thing. So I'm generally pointing to is that there is an obvious shift taking place. And I think with Mamdani and the points he's made, it shows that he's responding to that, as I read it anyway. But I argue that the base you're speaking to, Jeffrey, funny enough, remember he went out in his earlier, I think it was in the first run for first administration, where he said he could shoot somebody in the middle of Times Square and they still vote for him. He's not wrong, so that's what you're speaking to. That probably doesn't change regardless of what he says, but the people that might just not be blindly supporting because just Trump are the ones that maybe supported him because they believed in him and are now like Dennis is saying, their groceries are more expensive. They don't feel like things are changing. And it's like, there's only so far they can keep just pretending it's happening until their lives are being affected. Like you said, Jeffrey, they're getting smacked in the face. And so now they're going, I can't just keep pretending, So it's interesting to watch. And I think it'll be more clear a majority as we get to the next election. Go ahead.
And Ryan, and many people might also think as things is not better, not what they'd like them to be, they'd be even worse with somebody else.
Yeah, right. Good point. From they say Kamala still,
I know a lot of people who tell me, Trump's very imperfect, but he's the best option we have.
Yeah,
and I know a lot of people, strong Reagan supporters, and their point is people who are concerned about economics, but also concerned about their perception of our standing in the world, the culture wars and stuff like that, the issues that all the various issues that are important to them. They say, yeah, Trump's very imperfect, but he's a warrior. Okay. The other people are all cowards. So they'll continue to support him not because they think he's perfect, not because they don't think he's doing a lot of things that are stupid. They just think he's the best they got. Okay. He's the least of the worst. Okay. So
lesser of evils.
They continue to support him for doing that. So maybe, right. If somebody, and then going back to the comment that Dennis made is if you think Trump is fighting and maybe doing certain things wrong, but he really is, quote, putting America first, then the question is who's putting up, an alternative agenda that resonates with people. So far what we have is we have no Republican challenging Trump's agenda, except maybe Rand Paul, and then we don't have Democrats challenging the agenda with an alternative agenda. So all we have, so people really don't have a choice. They have Democrats telling them, Trump is horrible, but we're not going to tell you what we're going to do different, and then Republicans sitting back and saying, and it's interesting because, you would think that given the fact that Trump is not going to be on the ballot in 2028, that there would not be Republicans. If Republicans believed the base turned against Trump, there'd be Republicans already promoting that because they'd be looking to 2028. Okay.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
The fact that 2028,
I think
it's like, yeah, you might have it. Well, let's see how that works out for her. Let's see if she, does.
That's just my opinion. Just my opinion.
But when we see more people really standing up and saying, I want to be president 2028, and I'm going to start distancing myself from Trump, it's because they believe it's smart to do so. I'm not seeing enough people.
I don't think that would happen, but I don't think that the Republicans who I'm talking about members of my family here. I'm still consider myself somewhat of a Democrat, but I don't think that Republicans are ready to accept another leader right now at this moment. Jeffrey, you well explained the paradox of people who may be getting hurt by the administration's policies, but they still support the president. The question here that is of electoral significance is whether this basically been mobilizing for anger and other purposes by 2028, even 2026, is going to be in a position where they're going to mobilize to go and vote. Because I think that one of the things that I'm starting to see is a fraying of support in that base. And you don't need to lose much to start to, to see a House of Representatives flip, which I think will happen. But you raise a larger point, Jeffrey, and that is, what do Democrats stand for? Is there a clear economic program? I would submit there's not. The battle over the Affordable Care Act is a good example. Democrats ought to be advocating, in my opinion, Medicare for all. But, will they do that? No. They ought to be advocating protecting public education. Will they do that? It's not happening. I mean, there's the last time we had an architect of a democratic program that was accepted by Americans as from a democratic president was Franklin Roosevelt. And in 1932, Roosevelt led one of the largest Democratic congressional majorities in history into office. You've got to have a clear program that shows you're going to uplift the lives of the American people. And if you don't do that, I don't care how many slogans you have, how many people you want to make angry, how many people you threaten to hang. That's not going to play. So, we'll see in 26 this conjecture that we have about Trump's base, how cohesive it holds. But I'm going to tell you, I look at this, and he will have, I think, some foreign policy victories coming up that might be characterized as such. Let's put it that way. But I just don't see how he turns this domestic economy into something that he can claim that Americans will recognize as good for them. And that's where I think it's all going to come down to. I know I sound like a broken record on that, but this is what I see, not just what I hear going around, the country from east to west.
There's one more point to add to this in regard to, almost outside of the left-right framing of it all. You might have seen this going around in regard to independence. I think it's something like 64% at this point disapprove, and it's like a major shift in independence. And if you stand back and look at pretty much every election cycle, you basically have the majority of the country, for the most part, that doesn't even partake in these elections, and then you have the majority of the people that do who register as independents. I mean, this is almost every single time. And so what's fascinating to me is you now have an example showing you that the majority of this country doesn't like Trump or doesn't support him, at least according to polls, which I always point out are easy to manipulate. So it's really just a talking point. But I think it's interesting to point that out in the larger. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah. My counterpoint to that, Ryan, is you might have sit back and say let's look at Trump in isolation and say, do you agree with what he's doing? And you might get, 60% say, no, I think it's awful. Then he might run against somebody else, and that person comes up with their ideas, and they might think 80% of the people might think they're awful. So the question is not how many people think I'm awful on an absolute basis. The thing is, am I less awful or more awful than the person I'm competing against?
That's a great point, actually. So you mean in the context of like the next election? That's actually a great point. But what I'm kind of saying though is more so about like the people of America becoming disillusioned about the way our government works. So it's not just Trump. It's kind of like this is the moment that's becoming very clear. But you make a great point: is that when it comes to the next person, it's going to be the lesser of evils all over again, and that's something we always talk about.
As disillusioned as they are, they still typically vote for the same. They still typically vote for incumbents. So
and that's why it's not the majority anymore.
They keep saying they're disillusioned, but they're not willing to vote for third-party candidates. They're not willing to take risk. If the
majority of the American people don't vote, then that's the disillusionment, right? And so it's like it keeps getting smaller and smaller, and then they keep framing that as the entire conversation. So your point's valid, but if you stand back and look at the full picture, the American people have been disillusioned about this for a really long time, and these stats just simply show this continued encroachment of independence, bucking both the left-right paradigm, but also within the ones that do still participate, not the bulk that doesn't. They're active and they are aggressively unhappy with what's happening. But I would argue it was probably similar during COVID-19. And I argue it'd be similar even if Kamala was in office. But we've all acknowledged that Trump is a special animal. I'm not trying to act like he's not, but it's definitely something big changing in the way Americans view politics. At least that's how I view it.
Well, what if I may, Ryan, to offer not necessarily a different point of view, but to kind of elaborate on what you're saying. The American polity is so polarized right now that the space for people who identify as independents keeps shrinking, even though the paradox is more and more Americans see themselves as independents, but the polarization between them and our is the greatest it's ever been.
Right.
And so people then go to the polls and they're moved to either go a D or an R, no matter who the independent is. I think this is a tough time for independents, and the battles inside the Democratic Party has to be fought for an independent type Democrat who isn't going down a party line that has been established, that's been basically indistinguishable from the Republican Party ever since Citizens United and Buckley versus Vallejo, came to change the campaign contribution laws. So, there are more Americans who are independent thinkers, but this polarization does have a very powerful part in the choices that people make when they come and vote. And the inability of an administration to deliver. Remember Reagan's test: are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And if a president can't clear that bar, the presidential high jump to the electoral college is not going to be possible to be able to win.
Well, I think right now, if you take a look at the polling, and I understand, I take Ryan's point that, when I view polling, I say there's some information value in it and a lot of noise. I don't think there's no information value in it.
I agree.
There's some. So if you find it for some, what we're seeing now is really a huge difference in like people's outlook on how they feel. If you ask people, do they think, if you ask people, do you think, Trump, how do they think about their future now, right now, Democrats thinks it's horrible and Republicans are still very optimistic. So it's not like if you take a look at what your circumstances are today, people are looking at their circumstances from the prism of their own, from the perspective of their own biases. So if they believe in Trump, they're optimistic about the future, even if they haven't experienced it yet. If they don't believe in Trump, they think the future is horrible, and they're very pessimistic about it. So, so when you look at the detail, one thing is to look at the final numbers. The other is to look at the details behind those numbers, and typically is reported. Well, good journalists will report more details and they'll break it up into saying, okay, this is what the whole population thinks. And then they separate it between Democrats and Republicans. Oh, we just lost Ryan. So just you and I, Dennis. But I think, I don't know. How did you use polls when you ran for office? How did you use, and you were governed? Did you ever have your own team that did polls? How did you pay attention to polls?
For the longest time, I didn't do polls. I relied on what I heard out in the community. Later on, I did use polls, and I had a pollster who was a terrific math person. His name was Bob Weissman. And I didn't use them for policy ever. But what I would use them for is to try to determine, what the election looks like. What I learned, and the most valuable thing I learned, is this: that you might be winning an election, but if you get attacked, within the last week, without answering it, you could sometimes 10 points could be moved. You could be up by 10 points, and then you're in a race for your life. You could be up by 5 points, and you're going to lose. The polling can be valuable, I think, to determine where you're at. But I'm always skeptical of using polls to determine policy, because that has to be. I'd rather go out to people and see what they think than to have a pollster tell me this is what people think.
But from my understanding, and maybe you can correct that, on many people run for office, many people in office, and the parties are active users of polls. Is that?
Oh, well, listen, maybe I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Through 16 years in Congress, going to Democratic caucus meetings, the meetings would be about three things. Number one, what do the latest polls say? Number two, how much money have you raised and how much are you going to raise? And number three, how bad the Republicans are. Now, the Republicans have it differently. The Republicans will talk about, number one, the latest polls. Number two, the how much money's been raised. And number three, how bad the Democrats are. That I think's been the difference between the two parties. And so polls are used. Polls are taken as often an article of faith, but polls are also misused to be able to create behavioral contagion, to be able to move a candidate forward who otherwise wouldn't be acceptable, to be able to create conditions that people may know, hey, I don't see it that way. They got to be all wet. But, polls are often used to make public opinion, not to measure it. And that's where people have to be very savvy as to who's doing the polling, what's their intention, who are they working for, who's paying them, and why are they coming to this conclusion? Because polls are easily manipulated. You tell me the results you want, and I'll tell you the questions to ask.
But as easy as polls are to manipulate, a lot of money is spent using polls.
Oh, look at, of course, and you want pollsters who have integrity, who can give you good or bad news based on what really is going on. But there's another aspect here too, and that is that if you really want to lead, you cannot rely always on polls. You have to go by your instinct, and sometimes help make public opinion, to create those tidal forces that can move things in a certain direction, even if it appears to be unpopular at the moment. And that, polls can be used to homogenize our politics.
Well, I missed part of what you were saying. Sorry, I lost the internet connection there for a minute. Just on the poll point, in case I'm missing part of it, I just think I agree with what Jeffrey had said before I went off, though, that first that I agree that it can be straight up like false, right? I've seen polls that are just completely misrepresenting the reality, but even that gives you something, right? That gives you an insight into something, what their intention was. So I agree that there's always a use to it. And sometimes they can be very valuable. Like there's polls that definitely give you an insight, but like you were saying, you could just poll a certain demographic or a certain state and it's going to slant what you want to see, but they're still valuable. My opinion on my show is just never take them at face value. Consider it, right? Question it, but use it as you can. But I think right now, even the polls, even from the insider, like RNC, DNC kind of stuff, it's showing you that there's a difference of people's minds about how the large issues are taking place. Like whether we're talking about Epstein files or foreign policy, or as you're saying, the economy, right? What's interesting, removing the Epstein files from it, those large discussions, as you're saying, Dennis, are the ones that are immediately impacting people's lives, but it feels like everything else is being used to sort of deflect away from that, which right. as you kind of alluded to, I do think there's a larger agenda behind all that. And that's what people aren't paying attention to.
Let me make one more comment about polls. And I look at polls this way. Polls the best polls, the honest polls, will tell you what the weather is today. But it's not a farmer's almanac. It's not really going to be able to predict what the weather is going to be like in November of 2026 or November of 2028. There's something deeper that's at work here in the American experience and in the psyche of the American people that polls may not be able to catch. But the best ones will give you a weather report. Here we are today. The sun's shining, may not be shining, down the road.
Yeah, I think that's the point I tried to make. Polls have some information value, but limited information value, and you need alternative information. It's just a data point among numerous other data points.
And you know what? The point here, and it's a good thing that you brought this up, Jeffrey, because the point here is that polls are by their very nature quantitative. People live in a world that is more than quantitative. It's qualitative as well. And there are qualitative dimensions to one's life experience that impact how people feel about things.
But ultimately, the qualitative feelings are still reflected in a quantitative event, which is a vote. Okay, so and that vote is quantitative. So with all the qualitative features that exist that make into people's how people make a decision, and people, have, all have different utility functions. So, and given the fact that people have all utility functions when it comes to politics, all we see is the end result is how they voted. So,
but if I may turn that glove inside out, I'm not arguing with you. But I'm saying let's invert the argument in the way that Reagan did when he said, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" That was a qualitative question that merged into a quantitative result. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, and the point I tried to make is, if you ask Republicans if they're better off, they are saying yes, they are. And if you ask Democrats, they're saying, "Are you better off?" They're saying, "No, we're not." This is the
I don't think I agree with the Republican point. This is a subjective. It's opinion, largely, like we made a point before. But I just want to reiterate that I actually don't think that's what's happening. I think more Republicans right now. Let me say it like this: I think more conservatives are not supporting what the team sport Republican Trump administration is doing. I think you can kind of prove that in a lot of ways. But I mean, it's subjective at the end of the day. That's my opinion.
So you think most of these people are going to vote Democrat in 2026?
No. See, that's different. That's not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying it was the point you made earlier, which was well taken, which is that's a different thing, right? I'm saying that right now it's clear to these, like I would argue, again, my opinion, that the majority of conservatives, maybe 51%, right? It doesn't have to be everything, but that they are very unhappy because their grocery prices are up. They wanted the Epstein files, right? These are the real people, But to your point, I could absolutely see a world where they would vote for Trump over the next left-leaning person because that's how they see the world. It's frustrating.
My next question, Brian, would be, if they think they're still unhappy with grocery prices, how much do they blame Trump and how much do they blame Biden?
Good point. Right. And that's frustrating too.
Okay.
But the point I was making, Jeffrey, is that I do argue still that the majority, even if it's just 51%, are upset with Trump. But they will probably go, but Biden started it or something like that. But your point's also well taken.
They might not be upset with Trump. They might be upset with the fact that things are not as good as they hoped they would be, but they accept the fact that they got to give Trump more time because he inherited such a mess that he's doing a good job given the mess he inherited.
That's not what I'm arguing. I'm saying the opposite. But well, we don't. How can we know for sure? But I'm of the mind that most conservatives are actually thinking that they were almost double crossed at this point.
So you think they'd be better off with Kamala Harris?
No. See, again, now that's a different conversation. But I'm arguing with where we are right now, that they believe that what Trump promised them is either not happening or that they're literally doing the opposite. And that's evidenced by some of the most popular people at the head of that movement who are now saying that. So I can't prove via poll that that's what they actually are saying as a majority, but I think it's pretty clear that that's a likely possibility. And I do think that's what's happening.
2024 is a wrap, let's say, but 2028, 2026 and 2028 will be predicated on the comfort or level of discomfort that people have that Republicans have with the administration's policies, and whether Democrats are able to offer something that seems more palatable. But once you're in office, though, you cannot argue. There's a limited time you have to argue, well, the other guy did it.
I think
you can't do that.
I think when it comes to these issues, and I think this is the problem for Trump. I mean, I agree with some things that both of you are saying, and that's why I think Trump is pivoting on things. He's reducing some of the tariffs. He does understand. First he ridiculed the word affordability, right? He ridiculed it. People use this word. He made a big joke about it, but then he goes out and he starts reducing tariffs. So, so he realizes he's got to do something with this issue. So somebody is sitting down with him. Who knows if he sits down with Bessent, or who knows who he's sitting down with. And he's saying, I don't want to abandon my tariff policy, but how can I? So he's already acknowledged. It's funny. On one day they sit back and say the tariffs have not caused any inflation at all.
Right.
Then on the other hand, he's responding to the affordability issue by reducing tariffs.
Which he then promotes.
The tariffs policy is independent of the inflation rate. Why is this responding to the inflation, reducing the tariffs?
Right.
I mean, but this is my point. And this is the whole point from the beginning. When you advance stupid arguments, when you bullshit people, okay, when you govern by noise and bullshit, okay, that perverts the whole ability to have an intelligent conversation about anything. Okay.
Yeah.
Gresham's law. Okay. Bad money forces good money out of circulation. You know, what you want to do, if there's bad money and good money, you hold the good money, you spend the shitty money. Okay. So if there's a lot of bad money out there, you want to convert the bad money into good money. You don't want to hold on to the bad money and spend your good money. You want to spend the bad money first. Gresham's law. Okay. I think this is the same thing. We have so much bad conversation out there. Okay. It's forced any decent conversation out of circulation. So I think this is the damage. This is the damage of I think, trying to govern this way is the fact is that we cannot have an intelligent conversation about anything.
But Jeffrey, we are having
Yes.
a conversation that we hope will appeal to the higher cortical functions of our viewers. And I think that's the value of this podcast. And these things can have a ripple effect because I think people sooner or later hunger for information about what is really going on, as opposed to the circus that is forever before their eyes.
And if we have a constitutionally literate society, then what Trump says and what J.D. Vance says and what Stephen Miller says, they would never say that to a constitutionally literate people. Okay, they wouldn't. Okay, because everybody would call them on their bullshit. Okay, but they say it and they repeat it because they think it works, and they probably have some data that it works. And if you take a look at social media, and sometimes when you look at what people comment on platforms like Twitter, whatever, is you see them endorsing a lot of this stuff. People reinforcing this. You hear some of the Congress people have said they now have a huge increase in the amount of death threats they're getting, as a result of this statement, and people are calling them traitors. So people do think they should get hung. People do think they should be put in jail. So this is a sign of a constitutionally illiterate public. Okay,
Well,
if the public was literate on the Constitution, they would be very easy in detecting bullshit. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you're talking, Jeffrey. You made me think of a scene in that old movie, The Graduate, where Dustin Hoffman was one of his earlier movies, and he's this graduate, and an advisor comes up to him at a graduation party, and he gives him the key word, and the key word was plastic. Start, focus on plastics in your career ahead of you. Yes. And today, Jeffrey comes out and says civics. It should be civics, and it's the lack of civic awareness, that the lack of being taught civics, that is part of the challenge we have today, which would, if we had an understanding of the different roles of the legislative and executive branch and the moral responsibilities of a president, you would never have a president in any way, shape, or form inciting a public to do violence against political opponents or members of Congress. You can't, I have to tell you, as somebody who has served in the House for 16 years, I felt that was way over the line, that you cannot be calling members of the other party or members who disagree with you traitors, invoking the idea of a death penalty. One has to take responsibility for those statements, and I'm concerned somebody could get killed as a result of those statements. It's very serious, isn't? You can't. I don't think we can make light.
Well, I think going back to a point Ryan made, maybe both of you made, is the fact is that, we had a debate just a couple of months ago where Republicans blamed Democrats for the assassination of Kirk for the words they chose to use. Okay. Mm-hmm. So they viewed those words as inciting. Okay. And they were very critical of Democrats that used the word fascist or something like that. So apparently calling somebody a fascist is really, really horrible. And you're basically inviting them to be killed, but calling them a seditious traitor, okay, is not so bad, and that's okay, and that doesn't provoke the same outcome. Part of this is a result of people partisanship. Partisanship turns people into hypocrites. Okay, what the behavior that they accept from their friends, they don't accept from their enemies. It's not a universal principle, of human values. It's not a virtuous behavior. I'm on my team. I'll defend my team. I'll defend the undefendable because they're on my team, but I don't hold other people. I hold other people to a completely different standard. Okay. When we accept the concept of the double standard, okay, we're not virtuous people. Okay. That's not our justice system. Our justice is supposed to be, what does it mean to be our justice is blind? Our justice is supposed to look at the facts and the circumstances, okay? And who the people are and their identity is less important than the actions they did and their motives, and the consequences, okay? But whoever the individual is should not be a part of that judgment, okay? It's what they did, why they did it, what the circumstances were, and that's what our justice system does. They're not supposed to look at somebody and say, oh, gee, here, I got a jury here. This person voted for Trump, so I'll view them differently as opposed to this person voted for Harris, so I'm going to vote them differently. No, justice is supposed to be blind. We're supposed to judge people. We're supposed to judge the circumstances, the facts, the actions, the deeds, okay? To the extent that we can't do that, we're being unjust. To the extent we're being unjust, we're not being virtuous, okay? Yeah. So our system needs virtuous people to work. We were told that over and over again, that in order to have a constitutional republic, we needed to be virtuous people. Partisanship makes people not virtuous. They all say things that they know is bullshit when they say it because it works, okay? That's not virtuous behavior, and that's a consequence, of partisan behavior. And part of the thing that lets them get away with it, besides the fact that people are driven by, their identity taught into partisan politics. I'm a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not someone who just thinks for myself, and I have a philosophical view of my relationship with the government, and that's my view, and that's what it is. And I don't identify with any political party, which were the circumstances when the country was founded. Okay. And then, so, we don't have that. And then we have a level of constitutional, illiteracy, and it seems to be, as Ben Franklin stipulated, one of the primary goals of our our early years of education, Ben Franklin said, should educate us to be good citizens. Okay. We'll know what we need to know because this gift of this constitutional republic is worth saving, it's worth preserving, but ultimately a well-informed public who can debate things in a rational fashion, okay? Virtuous people engaged in reasonable, rational debate were prerequisites for the preservation of the republic, okay? So when we have people say the stupidity, that Trump says and other people reinforce, okay, they're debasing our constitutional literacy, okay? So, and rather than looking to enhance constitutional literacy, which is what they should be, attempting to do. This is why we always try and go back to, what our founding principles are and the Constitution and how we can actually figure out how we can live up to those principles, because living up to the principles is the only way we'll preserve our liberties.
Can I have one quick point to this in a broad sense to pretty much any argument we're talking about today? And I want to make clear, I agree with you, Jeffrey, that constitutional literacy, as we often point out, is a very big problem today. And it's obviously one of the biggest, cruxes. Like it's one of the biggest causes. What I want to point out, though, is that whatever we're talking about, I think it's worth considering where we are in the world today technologically and how that may change some of these things. For example, algorithms and AI control and basically whether we're dealing with bots and so on, right? Just again, that I do agree with the general point that I think some of that is being influenced, right? And so like whether, you're dealing with people who are making you feel that everyone thinks this way about one person or the other, it's worth considering some of that may not be real. Not to say that the point is not real in regard to the constitutional literacy or whatever we're making, but that part of it might be manipulated. It's worth looking into something like the dead internet theory and what the reality is around how many bots actually exist. I just want to point that out there because it really does change all these conversations when you consider how many elements there are technologically trying to influence your opinion.
Ultimately, many people try. Every time you watch an ad, every time you have a conversation with somebody, somebody's basically trying to influence your opinion. Our responsibility is to have the knowledge base where we either learn enough where we can make our own informed judgments, or we know who to ask to help us form better opinions. Okay, that's each person's responsibility, and if we're not good at it, and that's everybody's responsibility. Okay, the only way we'll preserve our liberty if everybody understands that is the responsibility. Unfortunately, we have a public that's a free riding republic. Okay, because we basically have free lunch economics. So when you have free lunch economics, you're going to have a free riding republic. So which ends up not being a republic at all. It ends up being mob rule. So and people look to benefit off free riding. Okay, people are looking for the free lunch, and the politicians constantly are creating people's ability to free ride, and they're constantly selling the free lunch. So to me, that's a significant part of the problem. Look, I mean, look how perverse it is. We went to war, during the Iraq War, and so what were we told? Okay, we were told the war would pay for itself, right, by Bush, in 2001, and we cut taxes. So it was not saying we got to go to war, we got to sacrifice. We're going to go to war. Don't worry, we got to volunteer. So you're never going to have to call on. You're never going to have skin in the game. As a matter of fact, we're taking away skin on the game. We're going to spend more money to execute a war, and we're going to tax a generation that just is not around to vote yet today. Okay. So, but at the end, the American people accepted that trade-off. Yeah, go do your war, and don't worry, you're cutting out taxes, so you're not paying us today. Who will pay the burden? Well, my kids, I'll leave them money. Everyone else's the burden to everyone else's society. Who gives a damn? Okay, so this is how So you either have the people who don't pay an income tax, which is half the population more or less, so they don't care because they're not going to contribute anyway. And then you have a percentage of the population that they're really well off, so whatever deficit, that is created, they don't really believe that their future wealth will be confiscated. And if they do, they're already taking measures to protect their future generation against the potential confiscation of wealth. They might hide assets somewhere. They might own, Bitcoin or, something like that else, but they'll take the measures to protect, their wealth if they're fearful, of a wealth tax, and who gets squeezed? The middle class gets squeezed, the lower middle class gets squeezed, the working poor, get squeezed, in this system. But why does this perpetuate? It perpetuates because we have unrealistic expectations, and it perpetuates because everybody is bullshitting them. You don't need the bots to bullshit us. Okay, people who are self-identifying are bullshitting all the time.
I agree. I do. I didn't want speaking, but I definitely agree with the general point. I think that people are out there every which way trying to convince you of what they want you to think. The general thing is just to consider with how much technology just adds to that, right? And so, as Jeffrey points out, it behooves all of us to be extremely skeptical, right? And like I often point out in my show, my general tagline is just question everything. But it's much a longer tagline to express the real point, which is question everything while considering all possibilities. People tend to think it means kind of disregard things. It's the way we have to live our lives. We have to be engaging with everything, including for people we may think are trying to lie to us, right? Consider what they're saying, look at what the data is, where's the source material, consider it all, question everything. It's the only way you can live your life today. I think it always should have been the way we're living, but today more than ever with everything going on. So I definitely agree.
Dennis?
In these confusing times where the politics has become a blood sport, I think we have to go back to, what are our own basic values, not those that are impressed upon us by a political system that at times seems out of control. And we have to be careful about what the government is telling us. I mean, just moments ago, the government tells us that Senator Mark Kelly, who was quoted at the beginning of this program, should be investigated for serious misconduct by the Department of War. This is an attempt to just keep this thing going on and on. Stop it, Mr.
But again, Dennis,
Stop.
it would be stopped. It would be stopped if we had a literate public. If we had a constitutionally literate public, it would be stopped.
But
Because
people
would turn off that
who
bullshit.
who love America, who care about this country, have to start saying, just stop it. Start taking care of things here at home and stop this endless attack on people perceived to be political opponents. Just take care of the basic needs of the American people. And then you want to have fun, but they're not taking care of the people, period. I've got to wrap this up here, Jeffrey, but I'm very grateful to participate in this discussion, which I think always elevates the issues that ought to be discussed and always tracks back to constitutional principles, the basis on which we should be operating our public affairs and our government. Virtuous citizenry. Thanks, Jeffrey, for that. And thanks, Ryan. Talk soon.
Well, Ryan and I will wrap this up in your absence. And thank you for your participation, Dennis.
Thank you.
I know Ryan pretty much has a hard stop too. So we'll wrap this up now. Before you wrap this up, Ryan, I'd like to, one of the comments that we received today was something related back to an earlier part of the conversation that I think is a wise comment. It was, there is a reason the term malignant narcissist is a thing. They will tell lies past the point of benefit to themselves, past the point of any credulity. So I think that, I think that's a very accurate statement. And I don't think that Trump is the only malignant narcissist in Washington. I think Washington is populated mostly by malignant narcissists. Democrats, Republicans, almost everybody that runs for office, is a malignant narcissist. And those that want to be presidents, probably even more so. So, so I think that's it goes with the territory.
Right.
And they also reinforced, we don't have a constitutionally literate population. Most are largely illiterate. And, and that's why our objective here is mostly about education and linking everything back to the Constitution, because we think the only hope in preserving the Republic, is not a discussion about policies. It's the ability to have a intelligent, rational conversation, even if we don't end up agreeing with each other. Is the fact is that we can, have a conversation with each other, even when we don't necessarily, agree. And we're not trying to provoke and enrage anyone. What we're trying to do is search for the truth. And sometimes, sometimes we're right and sometimes we're wrong, because we're all human and we're all fallible. I'll just make one other comment, Ryan, related to something you said. When I get invited to do lectures at universities, and I've lectured at Harvard and Chicago, where I studied at, and Stanford, I've lectured in other parts of the world. I always tell people, I'm telling you the world as I see it, but I'm not telling you that because I'm sitting up here, I'm in front of a blackboard, I got a piece of chalk, that makes me any authority, more authority than you. I have experience. I can share my experiences. You can try from you can try learning from it. But at the end, because I'm saying it, or whoever else is in front of you is saying something, don't think they're the experts. Your job in life is to make yourself the expert. Okay. So that's what I constantly try and reinforce, is because I'm saying things, I hope you consider it. I hope you think about it, but you got to think about it from a critical perspective. I don't want people just shaking their head saying, yes, 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 yes. I like to be challenged on what I say, because that sharpens me. So the only way I can see the flaws in my own logic is if somebody else points them out to me. Right. So, so I like when people think about something that I hadn't thought about, because that makes me smarter. So, So I don't speak to reinforce, my own sense of my own intelligence. I hope I get pushback, and challenged so that I can constantly challenge myself, and constantly grow and evolve. So, knowledge never ends. So it's like a pursuit of knowledge is like an asymptotic process. You keep trying to get smarter and smarter every day, but there's always a lot smarter. As smart as you might be today, there's a lot smarter than you can be if you continue to have an open mind about things.
Right. And I'm sure that's why you have me on this podcast, Jeffrey, because I'll speak my mind. but I think I couldn't agree more. And it's just such an important thing to be able to have an amicable disagreement. I mean, that's where that turn we've touched on more than once in this show around, and it wasn't just Trump, but it was around his first administration where there was this really hard turn to where you weren't just on the other aisle. You weren't just a different opinion. You were the enemy. The left, the right, and it was just it was a very sharp turn, and we're in it now. We have to be able to discuss these things, and as we pointed out in the past, agree on the definition of words on top of that to be able to have a real conversation. So thank you again for putting this on, and I think it's increasingly more valuable every time. So thank you, Jeffrey.
Okay, you have a great day.
You too,
Brian, and Bruce. We missed you, and we tried to do our best without you. So
I'll be here next time. Have a
take
good
care,
one.
Ryan. Bye.